Hi everyone, this is a tune from UMH, number 593, Here I Am, Lord.
Good morning and welcome to worship at Lino Lakes Community Church. We are glad you're here.
Hi everyone, this is a hymn from UMH, number 452, My Faith Looks Up to Thee. life's transient dream, when death's cold sullen stream shall o'er me roll. Blessed Savior, then in love, fear and distrust remove. Oh, bear me safe above a ransomed soul.
I'm gonna make you all think a little bit this morning. I know, a huge bummer. But I want to do some polling. I want to know your opinion on stuff. So I'm going to show you some pictures, and I want you to think of some words that come to mind, specifically adjectives. When you see this, what do you think of? What words come to your mind? I think overpriced, overhyped. But they do have better privacy software than Android. Okay, how about this one? This one makes me think of bubbles, bubbly. It also makes me think how Coca-Cola is the biggest plastic polluter in the world, which, is kind of a bummer to think about, but that's what comes to my mind. And what about this? This one makes me think of all the people who I know in their 30s that are just way too old to be that into Disney as much as they are. It's kind of creepy to me. That's what that makes me think of. I'm sorry if that's you. I don't mean to offend. But what about this one? This one is TikTok. TikTok is this video social media platform that people younger than me use that makes me think, why are those kids always on their phones? TikTok is technology that I don't get or understand. It frustrates me because from what I know, it shrinks everything down into, short 10-second clips. And it bothers me because I think things are bigger and longer than 10-second clips. It's hard to capture a full story in a short 10 seconds. But logos are interesting, right? They're kind of the face value of stuff. But I always think everything goes deeper. There's a deeper meaning, a deeper story, a deeper identity behind the surface of the things that we see. Advertisements try to shape how we feel when we see these logos, because ultimately how things are interpreted is up to our subjective experience. We all interpret things differently. And our experiences, both individually and collectively, shape the way that things like products or celebrities or even truth can impact our world. I was just talking with our office admin, Francine, about her trip to California. She said she got to go on a tour through Hollywood and was surprised at how many different environments that studios can make in one small building. You think of like a movie set. They can create living rooms, homes, neighborhoods, outdoor, camping, nature. All these different sets can be created behind the scenes and put into this one small building. And that's something I want us to hold this week as we move through this episode of the Transfiguration in Luke's Gospel. This idea of behind the scenes, this idea of how we interpret things, this idea of like stories, beliefs, and feelings behind the face value of both things and of people. And then how do we change, and how do others change around us when we begin to recognize those deeper stories? Our scripture lesson this morning comes from Luke 9, verse 28 through 36. About 8 days after Jesus said these things, he took Peter, John, and James and went up on a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed and his clothes flashed white like lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, were talking with him. They were clothed with heavenly splendor and spoke about Jesus' departure, which he would achieve in Jerusalem. Peter and those with him were almost overcome by sleep, but they managed to stay awake and saw his glory as well as the 2 men with him. As the 2 men were about to leave Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, It's good that we're here. We should construct 3 shrines, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. But he didn't know what he was saying. Peter was still speaking when a cloud overshadowed them. As they entered the cloud, they were overcome with awe. Then a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him." Even as the voice spoke, Jesus was found alone. They were speechless and at the time told no one what they had seen. For scripture in, among, and beyond us, thanks be to God. This episode of Luke's Gospel is a huge moment in Jesus' life and ministry, not just for him, but also for the disciples and the audience reading. Just prior to this transfiguration event, Jesus had fed the 5,000 in response to that, Peter recognized Jesus as the Christ. That is, Jesus was the Messiah sent by God to redeem Israel. Then 8 days after that, we have the story of Peter, James, and John following Jesus up this mountain and experiencing something truly divine. The disciples had this kind of theological or spiritual belief about Jesus in their heads, but they hadn't experienced it in the flesh. They had a surface level understanding of the Messiah. They understood the logo of the Messiah, and now Jesus was going to slowly reveal what's going on behind the scenes. And the transfiguration is the beginning of that revelation. And Luke offers it to us through Peter, James, and John's heritage and their senses, specifically through sight and sound. So let's look behind the scenes here. We have Jesus on a mountain with these 3 disciples, and the first image Luke is giving his readers is a callback to the Old Testament story of Moses and the Exodus from Egypt, which was Israel's story of freedom from bondage. So here are the similarities between this event in Luke and the events in Exodus 24 through 25. There's the presence of companions, being up on a mountain. Moses is there. There's a changing face. There are mentions of tabernacles, the presence of Yahweh through a cloud, Yahweh speaking to the people present, and finally tying Moses to the theme of departure. Or it could be translated as, Jesus' exodus. That's what Jesus, Moses, and Elijah are talking about. The literal Greek word here is exodon. In school, when your friend wanted to copy your homework, but you told him to change it up a little bit so it doesn't look like your work? That's what Luke is doing here with Exodus chapter 24 and 25. But this is a super familiar story in Jesus, Peter, John, and James's religion. If you were there, you too would have seen Jesus, Moses, and Elijah and been like, let's build a tabernacle. Because that's what you do when you're a Jewish person meeting God on a mountain in the 1st century. This story is so rote and familiar that Luke's deviations from the story say just as much as the commonalities, which is where we see even further behind the scenes. And one particular way Luke uses this is through sight. And then there are other motifs in Luke's gospel as well. In this story, we hear about the disciples recognizing the appearance of Christ's face. Look, behold, 2 men. They see Moses and Elijah, and they appeared in glory. And then the disciples were weighed down with sleep, but since they stayed awake, they saw Jesus' glory. Then when the clouds descend, their vision is obscured, so God's voice can be heard. This is my son. And finally, the story ends with the disciples keeping silent, telling no one what they had seen. Sight, staying awake, listening, revelation. All these motifs are threads that run through Luke's gospel and meet here in this moment of divine revelation. The Transfiguration is this pinnacle in Luke and Acts, connecting ancient Hebrew beliefs and Luke's message on who Jesus is as the Christ. Luke is taking this old familiar story of Exodus and tying it to Jesus' mission in Luke 4. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim release of the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to liberate the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. We can't get away from this verse in Luke because it's central to the whole message. Every part, every episode of Luke has this current in it. Luke is offering a new revelation, a new exodus, a new freedom from bondage that connects to Peter, John, and James's understanding of faith, but is also inviting them to think bigger, to look behind the scenes. And when we look at the larger picture of Luke Acts, we recognize that these men play a large role in their leadership that breaks open the church for a Gentile audience. Peter, John, and James recognize this old story and begin to connect it to the future of the church. So we're beginning to recognize the stories behind the story here. This moment of transfiguration is on display, and behind it are stories of Moses and Exodus and Revelation, a new revelation, and Christ's mission for the oppressed, and a reinterpretation of an old story for a new generation. So what does that mean for us? Because we're several generations down from Peter, John, and James. We sit at the end of a long road of faith and tradition. And one thing I've heard from several pastors, from several preachers, and from several scholars at different institutions is that each generation needs to come to terms with what the gospel means for that generation. Each generation needs to interpret the gospel for themselves. I sat on a lecture this last week hosted by someone named Dr. Josh Packard of the Springtide Research Institute. And this lecture was titled Navigating Religious Identity and Diversity Among Gen Z in a Post-Pandemic World. Very scholarly, very academic. But the lecture went into all of this research and data about the newest generation coming to age and how they relate to the world, specifically religion. And what they found was that Gen Z is the most diverse generation in history. Literally, they come from the most varied ethnic and social backgrounds than any other generation. And then there's this belief that the newest generation is losing faith in religion. But the data collected states that 71% of Gen Z from the ages 13 to 25 consider themselves religious. 71% from the ages of 13 to 25 consider themselves religious. However, another study by Gallup suggests that this same age group's trust in organized religion is at 36%, down from 65% in the 1970s. Which means in the last 50 years, the youngest generation's trust in the institution of religion has dropped by almost half. But young people still feel religious and spiritual. The thing that researchers gleaned from this was that young people are religious. They have faith. Belief is not disappearing despite what you've been told. They believe in some form of divine nature of the universe. They believe in a story deeper than themselves. And Dr. Packard talks about two crises facing young people today: the crisis of trust and the crisis of belonging. The crisis of trust is seen in the way that religious institutions and all institutions are failing to step into the worlds that young people care about. Issues of inclusion, social justice, dignity for all people, climate change, and equity are the issues that young people feel energized about. And these are the spaces that young people are in. And Gen Z does not perceive that religious institutions care about these values. And this lack of trust in institutions leads to a crisis of belonging. The health group Cigna did a survey of its participants to determine which age bracket experienced the most loneliness. Now, typically, it's the oldest generation that is found to be the most lonely. Their friends and family are passing on, and they're feeling the effects of old age. But a huge shift has occurred. Gen Z is currently the loneliest generation alive on our planet. Not only that, but Gen Z is the loneliest generation ever recorded. Gen Z is the loneliest generation ever recorded. The institutions of our world have failed to meet the needs of young people in our world. There is a lack of trust and belonging felt by an entire generation whose values align with justice, equity, and relationships. And the response of, well, they should just come to church does not speak to them because the church as an institution has taken an active role against or has been inactive in the values that the majority of Gen Z care about. Dr. Packer described the way Gen Z interprets faith and the world very eloquently. He used a food metaphor, which always works. He said his father grew up Catholic, and for him, for his father, religion was one plate of food. Here's Christianity. It is chicken and mashed potatoes. You can eat it or you can starve. Then the next two generations, Gen X and my generation, the millennials, experienced a shift. You know, our parents' single dish upbringing led to more choice. So we were given a menu. You know, you can be Methodist, you can be Baptist, you can be Lutheran, you can be Buddhist, you can be whatever you wanted. And here's the menu where you can read the description and choose. And now there's been another shift. The newest generation is not interested in these prepackaged meals. They're interested in the relationship and the stories behind the meals. They want to know what happened behind the scenes that led to that meal. They want to have a potluck where everyone brings their favorite dish. And they want to know how and why it's your favorite dish. And they may try it and they may like it, but know that it isn't for them. And they're comfortable knowing that this dish works for you and that's great, but they might be a vegetarian, so chicken isn't an option. And it's in the sharing of that story that trust is built. Because the biggest question, again, you know, this is a generalized sentiment by the folks this institute surveyed. The biggest question Gen Z has about faith is, how does it impact your earthly actions? How does your faith change how you live and move in the world? My friends, what do you see when you look at a young person? Do you see a potential donor? Someone who can tithe to the church? Do you see someone glued to their phone playing their TikTok videos? Do you see someone who is naive that doesn't yet understand how the world works? Instead of judging based on that initial outward appearance, what if we started asking questions that gave us insight to what is behind the scenes of their life? What if we asked them what they're passionate about? What would it look like to go and meet them there? To volunteer where they're volunteering, to offer them a faith that is more than an institution. Where is the Venn diagram of values and actions that we share? Where do the values of the dish that we were handed growing up align with the potluck that they're holding? Where can we build trust and relationships to end these crises of trust and belonging? I don't know the answer to those questions. For me, my solution is to hold space without judgment and ask questions from a place of curiosity. To find that common ground and build on it towards something better together. But the first step in that is looking behind the scenes and understanding the deeper stories at play. When we do that, we open others and ourselves up to relationships that can echo the mission of Christ in Luke 4 and the mission of the early church as it was broken open by the disciples who witnessed the transfiguration all those generations ago. We can begin to help the loneliest generation interpret the good news for themselves. May our eyes and ears be open to the way Christ is inviting us into this reinterpretation of the old story. Amen.
Hi everyone, this is a tune from UMH, number 140, Great is Thy Faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness, O God.
Thank you for joining us for worship today. God send you, the Spirit fill you, Christ go with you, and you with Christ always and everywhere. Go in peace.